Hello and welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on News 9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. We have a packed show for you. Let's get started with our big focus. Just weeks after his high-profile and much dissected and debated visit to Russia, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is set to embark on a day-long visit to Ukraine on the 23rd of August. And before that, he will be in Poland for 2 days starting tomorrow. At a press conference, the Ministry of External Affairs said Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be undertaking an official visit to Poland this week on the 21st and 22nd of August on the invitation of Prime Minister Donald Tusk. This is a landmark visit as the Prime Minister of India is visiting Poland after 45 years. This visit takes place as we also mark the 70th anniversary of the establishment of our diplomatic relations. On the Prime Minister's Ukraine visit, the MES said Prime Minister Modi will undertake an official visit to Ukraine on Friday, the 23rd of August, on the invitation of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. This is also a landmark and a historic visit, since this will be the first time an Indian Prime Minister will be visiting Ukraine in more than 30 years since we established our diplomatic relations. This visit will build upon the recent high-level interactions between the two leaders. Prime Minister Modi had met Zelensky in Italy on the sidelines of the G7 summit in June. Last month, Mr. Modi met Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow, reiterating India's stand on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The MES said, and I quote, "India has maintained a very clear and consistent position that diplomacy and dialogue can resolve this conflict and that can lead to enduring peace. So dialogue is absolutely essential. Lasting peace can only be achieved through options that are acceptable to both parties, and it can only be a negotiated settlement." On our part, India continues to engage with all stakeholders. Prime Minister Modi has had conversations with leaders of both Russia and Ukraine, and the Prime Minister also visited Russia recently. India is willing to provide all possible support and contribution required to help find peaceful solutions to this complex issue, and at this stage it is not for us to anticipate or prejudge what the outcome of these discussions will be between the leaders of India and Ukraine. That's what the ME's statement said. As we mentioned, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is set to travel to Ukraine, becoming the first Indian leader to visit the war-torn country in about 30 years. Some argue he has good reasons to try and placate Kiev and its Western allies. Kiev is due to welcome the Indian Prime Minister on the eve of Ukrainian Independence Day and just over a month after Mr. Modi visited Moscow, raising the hackles of Ukraine and the West. The visit could evoke mixed feelings amongst his Ukrainian hosts. India has maintained close ties with Russia despite the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 at the risk of significant irritation to Kiev and its allies. While Prime Minister Modi has called for peace, he has also refused to directly hold the Kremlin responsible for the war. This was illustrated during his trip to Russia in the month of July and his meeting with President Vladimir Putin, which coincided with Moscow's deadly attack on a Ukrainian children's hospital. The Indian Prime Minister responded with a carefully worded statement saying, "When innocent children are killed, the heart bleeds and the pain is terrifying." Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky had then described Prime Minister Modi's visit to Russia as a disappointment. He said, and I quote, in a scathing comment, he said, "It is a huge disappointment and a devastating blow to peace efforts to see the leader of the world's largest democracy hug the world's most bloody criminal in Moscow on a day such as this." The MEA says India has substantive and independent ties with both Russia and Ukraine, and these partnerships stand on their own. As we said, India has maintained a consistent stance on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, underlining the need for dialogue and diplomacy to resolve differences. During various international forums, India has refrained from taking sides, instead urging both parties to come to the negotiating table. The neutral stance has allowed India to maintain its strategic autonomy, enabling it to engage with both Russia and Ukraine. In this context, Mr. Modi's visit will be seen as a continuation of India's efforts to promote peace. By directly engaging with the Ukrainian leadership, Prime Minister Modi is reinforcing India's message that the conflict's resolution lies in diplomacy, not warfare. This approach aligns with India's long-standing foreign policy principles, which prioritize non-alignment and peaceful coexistence, though many now describe it as multi-alignment. Experts say this visit is a balancing act for India, which also gives New Delhi a chance to urge peace negotiations. But Indian diplomacy has to maintain a difficult balance. As for the Prime Minister's visit to Poland, remember, Poland has the 6th largest economy in the European Union. Poland will hold the next presidency of the Council of the European Union. The India-Poland bilateral trade is worth $6 billion, which makes Poland India's largest trading partner in Central and Eastern Europe. Indian investments in Poland are estimated at around $3 billion, while Polish investments in India are at around $1 billion. There's also a sizable Indian community in Poland, estimated at around 25,000, including 5,000 students. The MEA said on Monday, you may recall, that the government and people of Poland had offered valuable assistance during Operation Ganga for the evacuation of Indian students from Ukraine. More than 4,000 Indian students were evacuated via Poland at that time.
Shri Narendra Modi will undertake an official visit to Ukraine later this week on Friday, 23rd August, at the invitation of President of Ukraine, His Excellency Volodymyr Zelensky. This also is a landmark and historic visit, since this will be the first time that an Indian Prime Minister will be visiting Ukraine in more than 30 years since the diplomatic relations were established between our countries. The visit will build upon the recent high-level interactions between the two leaders. As you know, Prime Minister Modi and President Zelensky had met only a couple of months ago in June this year in Apulia, at the sidelines of the G7 summit. They had also met last year in Hiroshima on the margins of the G7 summit. So, as I also mentioned earlier, substantive and independent ties with both Russia and Ukraine. And these partnerships, they stand on their own. Prime Minister had, I would like to say that this is not a zero-sum game. Prime Minister had also traveled to Russia. Many ideas were discussed. Prime Minister has also met President Zelensky on a couple of occasions in the last 1 year or so. And they will now be meeting again in Ukraine. So I would like to say that these are independent, broad ties, and of course the ongoing conflict will form part of the discussions. So we would not like to frame it in the way that some of you have framed this. There was a question about humanitarian assistance. I think 16 packages have so far been delivered, ranging from medicines to power generators, medical equipment, medicines. I think 135 tons of material has been supplied so far, and further, initiatives are being explored. And at this stage, I would not like to comment on what the actual outcome will be at this stage.
I think it's a very exciting visit and an important one, symbolically as well as practically. You've been here and you can feel the, excitement building up, You've seen the coverage already in the Polish media. It's the top story. It's on the front pages everywhere. And this excitement is there thanks to Prime Minister Modi's international stature, his profile, and the excitement that Prime Minister Modi has chosen to come to Poland and to, break this nearly half a century gap at a time when, this is the first visit by an Indian Prime Minister. And so I think this visit has all of this excitement that is already building up. The visit is an important one because Poland, as an important country in Central Europe, it is a significant member of the European Union. India has politically close ties with Poland, as well as economically important and growing relations with Poland. We have a very good and growing bilateral trade turnover of about $6 billion, and the balance of trade is very much in India's favor.
All right. So how significant are these visits by Prime Minister Modi to Poland and Ukraine over the next few days? We are going to dissect that with our guests. Joining me on Global Lens tonight is Andrzej Bhattacharya, former Secretary, Overseas Affairs in the Ministry of External Affairs, and Dr. Swasti Rao, Associate Fellow at the IDSA and an expert on Russia-Ukraine affairs. I need to take a quick break here on Global Lens. Don't go anywhere. We will go across to our guests in just a moment.
Big fan of Ian Bell, watching him very classy in all formats.
I find Durban quite a challenge, which is still an enjoyable one.
You're not allowed to bowl a bouncer, so that tells you that they want to see runs on the board.
बड़े अच्छे अच्छे टूर्स किए हैं, बड़ी अच्छी अच्छी यादें हैं हर जगह की, जहाँ मैंने पर्सनली क्रिकेट को बहुत एंजॉय किया है. ऑस्ट्रेलिया एंड इंडिया में बहुत ज़्यादा एंजॉय किया.
I love playing again England and India, and they were both very different challenges.
Up close and personal with legendary cricketers like never before. Icons of the pitch.
This and more. Streaming on News 9 Plus. News is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
How do you fulfill that promise? Because ultimately expectations have to be met. If you look at the political landscape, is it really changing for women? And what is the inability of the forces that dead bodies surface but not the living people?
Muktiwani Duda was aide to Sheikh Mujib came to my CEO. I told him that the family of Sheikh Mujib is under captivity of the Pakistani forces. The first lady came with Sheikh Mujib and she embraced me and said, the God, the Allah has sent you to save us. Modi ji and the Hasina. During talk, she brought out this point again that Major Ashok Tara of Indian Army said me, my mother, my sister, my brother, we got independence on 17th December because of Ashok Tara.
This and more. Streaming on News 9 Plus. News is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News 9 Live with me, Neha Khanna, and we're discussing Prime Minister Narendra Modi's upcoming visits to Poland and Ukraine. Let me start with Sanjay Bhattacharya. Mr. Bhattacharya, while this may be the first visit to Ukraine by an Indian Prime Minister in 30 years, we know that the significance and context of this visit primarily lies in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Now, when Prime Minister Modi visited Russia and met with Vladimir Putin last month, he did raise the hackles of Kiev and its Western allies. In fact, President Zelensky issued a very strong statement calling that meeting between Mr. Modi and President Putin a big disappointment and a huge blow to peace efforts. Is this visit by Prime Minister Modi to Kiev going to be seen as India's balancing act? And what do you think New Delhi is really hoping to achieve here?
I think it has to be recognized that India is truly one of the emerging major powers globally. Its policy of strategic autonomy puts it in a rather unique position where we can be friendly with all countries across the world, irrespective of their ideology or persuasion otherwise. And therefore, it would be complicated to suggest that this is a balancing act. I would not personally subscribe to that, though there has been a fair amount of comment about that. You mentioned about the comment that President Zelensky had made when Prime Minister had traveled to Moscow and met with President Putin. I'm waiting to see what President Zelensky writes on his X account on the 23rd of August.
Okay, it will certainly be interesting to see how he welcomes the Prime Minister of India and how he sees this visit, given that he had a rather angry reaction and outburst really over Prime Minister's meeting and that hug with President Putin last month. Let me take this to Dr. Swasti Rao. Dr. Swasti Rao, how significant is this visit by Prime Minister Modi to Ukraine? A day-long visit, but the first since the war between the two countries began in February of 2022, and since you know, India is a country that has been accused by the West of being too close to Russia, despite Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Do you believe that this will help New Delhi, in a sense, reset its ties both with the West and with Kiev? I mean, even though, of course, Prime Minister Modi has met with President Putin and President Zelensky on multiple occasions in the last couple of years on the sidelines of various multilateral forums, but last month's visit did evoke very sharp reactions from Zelensky and others in the West. Do you believe this visit is likely to position India as a potential peacemaker, though frankly, this talk has gone on for over 2 years now?
Yeah, very good evening to you, Neha, and good evening to Ambassador Bhattacharya. It's great to see him and join him online. Well, yes, about Prime Minister Modi's visit to Ukraine and how important it is and the timing of it and everything else that you already mentioned. See, for once, one has to also understand that President Zelensky's criticism of the hug, actually, the hug diplomacy, or maybe that hug moment, came not from the hug itself, but because of the wrong timing of an attack on a children's hospital in Kyiv. And in fact, it was quite a turning point, because if you remember, the next day, Prime Minister Modi actually referred to, children dying in the war and how hurtful that is, even though he did not directly say that to Russia, or did not really directly implicate the context so directly. But anyway, so I mean, I think that particular thing needs to keep in mind. It needs to be kept in mind. So it is not just the hug diplomacy per se, but the wrong timing. And I think ever since that had happened, a lot of people had started to argue that you would see a kind of a balancing act from India's side. Now, whether that balancing act is going to be done or going to be initiated by the Prime Minister himself is something that, of course, came as a surprise. And the way I look at it, Neha, I mean, I have a very clear understanding of what this is. I think that if you look through the war of narratives about India's position and India's tilt to Russia, India's tilt to this and that and West and whatnot, I think genuinely, I think this is a reiteration that India acts in India's interests. This is a reiteration of the fact that India operates in strategic autonomy and is also mindful of how the global, so to say, the situation is changing. And the Russia-Ukraine war, if you notice carefully, has also been very, very dynamic. Only last 2 weeks ago, there has been another kind of an invasion into Russian territory that has also sort of changed with the dynamic of the war, at least. So what I'm trying to say is that analytically speaking, I see at least three dimensions which are worth looking into. One is that by doing what Prime Minister has done now, by taking this initiative, first going to Poland and then from there going to Ukraine, himself, and also if you look carefully at the MEA statement, which is very crisp. I think Mr. Tanmay Lal did a wonderful job making it very short, very crisp, and saying that the bilateral ties actually stand on their own. So what I see analytically as somebody who works on that region is that yes, there is a dehyphenation of India's policies, India's foreign policy with Ukraine from that of India's and from that of Russia. So India-Russia bilateral ties are separate; they stand on their own, and then India-Ukraine bilateral ties also have the potential to stand on their own. Because if you look carefully at what Mr. Lal said, he said that there's going to be a multifaceted discussion on all things from defense and humanitarian assistance and a whole host of things, scientific cooperation, etc. And not many people know that despite the war, actually the technical military cooperation with Ukraine has gone on. What we do not know, what seems classified, is the details of it, but the technical cooperation has actually gone on. So I think the first, then coming back, is this dehyphenation, which is again, in my opinion, a kind of reiteration of India's strategic autonomy and multi-alignment in India's national interest. That's the first thing. The second thing, of course, is it also somewhere reflects how, or it would have a bearing on how India perceives, the Russia-China strategic deepening, the deepening of the strategic alignment between Russia and China, because that remains to be an important factor. And we probably, this is India's way of being looking at it more pragmatically in terms of also multi-aligning. The third and more important is perhaps a reassessment of how India thinks of its neutrality. Because if you carefully see how India has exercised this neutrality in the war, regardless of what the narratives have been, all about, I think this neutrality has been, India has been reassessing it. It has been a positive kind of a neutrality. If you look at the official interactions between the Indian side and the Ukrainian side, starting from February or March 2022, all the way to 23rd August 2024, when the Prime Minister himself is going to be there, you can actually count about 40 to 42 times that the two sides have actually interacted in an independent manner and at an official level, which is recorded. So what I'm saying is that this kind of a neutrality and the meaning of that neutrality is something which needs to be reassessed, and something which needs to, where the positive side of it has to come out. And finally, I would say that, it is the right time to get a more 360-degree view of what India and Ukraine relations can be all about. So very quickly, of course, the first thing is about, like I said, the technical military cooperation. Of course, the other thing is about what are the opportunities for the Indians to actually play a role in the reconstruction, of Ukraine. As Ambassador Bhattacharya said, that we have been very, very forthcoming with sending humanitarian aid. But at the same time, now I think it is time to also develop and discuss mechanisms. Like we have the line of credit system, right? We have the triangular cooperation. So we have these mechanisms. Right. Now we perhaps need to sort of put our act together to see how we can take that forward in our independent, so to say, policy towards Ukraine.
Okay, you're saying there has been a de-hyphenation between Russia and Ukraine as far as India is concerned. India has maintained this neutrality from the beginning, which is known to the entire world. And of course, it was Prime Minister Modi's famous words to President Putin, this is not an era of war, that actually echoed around the globe. And even, in the recent past, the MA has said India maintains that dialogue and diplomacy are the only way forward. But Ambassador Bhattacharya, let me ask you this question. Given India's historically close and strong ties with Russia, in fact, Foreign Minister Jaishankar has been at pains to say on multiple occasions, it's a tried and tested relationship, India will do what is in India's interest. We're not going to be dictated to by the West or anyone else. Of course, there's been criticism, not just of our continuing defense ties with Russia, but also of India's increasing oil imports from Russia despite Western sanctions. My question is, do you believe that India is in a position where it enjoys the confidence of the West and Kiev to position itself as a country that can be an honest peace broker here?
But quite frankly, I don't think the Ministry of External Affairs has suggested that India would wish to play the role of a peace broker. However, what it has done consistently is to maintain a very principled position, and this has been articulated at various fora where we have outlined the need for ceasefire, for the cessation of violence, for diplomacy to take the role, and through negotiated settlements between the parties to come to a settlement that would be acceptable to both sides as well as being durable. At the same time, we have also joined the processes that have been initiated by others. For instance, we were there in the Swiss peace process, and although we did not join the eventual outcome, because quite understandably, since Russia was not invited to that particular event, if the two principal parties are not there, it really doesn't make much sense. The point is that there was a point of time when Russia and Ukraine were actually fairly close to having a settlement of this conflict. And these were in the early days of the conflict between the two sides. I think since then there have been several developments which might have taken the two countries somewhat further apart, and also because of the involvement of various other agencies and parties in different forms. But India has had a fairly consistent stand and a principled stand on this. My personal persuasion, if I may share, is that I think we have reached a stature today in global geopolitics where our principled position and our stand on values and our stand on peace and diplomacy has gained a certain currency. And I think we should now pitch in for bringing about negotiated settlements. I'm not quite saying that we need to come in as an honest broker, as you had said, but I think what we have urged both sides, and Prime Minister himself has spoken to both President Zelensky and President Putin in the past on the phone, and he's also spoken to them personally since he met Putin not too long ago, and he will be meeting Zelensky in just a few days from now, is that we really need to get our hands back on the diplomacy track and to realize that there are win-win solutions that can be worked out even when we have gone so far in conflict. So I think this point that Prime Minister had earlier made about this is not an era for war is actually a very serious issue and a proposal that I think both sides should take very seriously and to find out ways. There would probably come a time, I do not know if it is today, but there would probably come a time when we could play a more active role in bringing parties concerned together to bring about peaceful settlement. Because I think, I sincerely believe that we need to have newer settlements and to go beyond these zero-sum options that we seem to be bogged down in.
Absolutely, and it wouldn't be incorrect to say that India is one of the few countries in the world that actually can claim to have reasonably good ties with both parties to this conflict. On multiple occasions, Prime Minister Modi has picked up the phone and spoken to the presidents of both these countries. Very quickly, Dr. Swasti Rao, Prime Minister Modi has told President Putin this is not an era for war, and last month when he visited him in Moscow and that attack on a children's hospital in Kiev happened, he said the heart bleeds when children die and the pain is unbearable. This should not go on. What do you think Prime Minister Modi's message is likely to be when he meets President Zelensky in Kiev this week?
I think it's very clear that India was only reiterating its original position on the war, which has been very consistent, and not just in terms of statements made by Prime Minister Modi, but also the different statements, the overtures, the engagements done from India's side at the 4 collaborative peace summits, right, which is starting from Copenhagen to Jeddah, which in my opinion is the most important one because it set up certain working groups to actually provide tactical and limited mediation in the war, and India was represented by Shri Ajit Doval, and from there to Malta and then to Switzerland, where India did not sign on the joint communique, by the way. So with respect to your question, what would be India's message to President Zelensky? I think India's message to President Zelensky would be the same, which is that yes, you ultimately the war has to come to an end by negotiation, and the negotiations have had. You have to basically bring both the parties on the table, and you have to look for a solution that is lasting, that is sustainable, and that is acceptable to both parties. And I think everybody has been mentioning it in their own way and repeating the very obvious thing in their own way, is that India truly is privileged to have, and I think to be in this position of having excellent ties with the West, enduring ties with Russia, both stand on their own, and I would say a very committed role to Ukraine's peace as well, from the things that I just told you about. So I think the message is going to be clear, because that you will have to find a negotiation ultimately. But at the same time, let me also remind everybody that from the official information that we have so far, I think any effort to mediate more directly has been ruled out. It shows that right now perhaps it's not the right time, and that is why I say that what can make more sense is to actually reactivate and assess the performance of the tactical mediation groups, like the working groups that were made during the Jeddah summit. And I think it would be a great way to sort of look at that. It would also be a great way to develop people-to-people ties, Neha, because let's not forget that even at the time of the war, when the war started, there were about 18,000 Indian students who were studying in Ukraine, and especially the medical students. And even now, you have so many medical students. In fact, if you actually see what the Indians are saying there, I mean, they have great hopes from the Prime Minister, because he's known for a very pro-people diplomatic approach, So
absolutely. In fact, you're quite right. There was a lot of help from Ukrainian authorities when India reached out to them seeking safe evacuation of those Indian medical students who were trapped in a war zone at the time. Ambassador Bhattacharya, before we wrap up this discussion, very quickly I want to ask you this question. Why this visit to Poland, and why now? yes, this is going to be the first time that an Indian Prime Minister will be visiting the country in 45 years. And while, Poland is in a sense an important trading partner for India in Central Europe, the MEA has also mentioned how Poland was instrumental in the safe evacuation of thousands of Indian medical students who were caught in the crossfire in the Russia-Ukraine war. But in your assessment, why Poland and why now?
So 3 reasons, I think, principally. The first is there is the Europe factor. And as you know, Poland is going to take over the chair of the Union shortly. Our ties with Europe are very critical if you look at the future direction of our economy as we merge into a knowledge economy, as we look at technologies. So I think Europe is a big focus, and Poland, as one of the most dynamic economies and a future political leader of the European Union, will obviously be something that we should understand much closer and take further. I think there is great understanding between the two sides, but take further this understanding, particularly in the European context. The second issue is that I think it is not very well known, but Poland is a huge center for technology, and new and critical technologies are being developed there, many of them in collaboration with other partners in the Western world. And it is time for us, as we merge more into the value and global supply chains, that we work with many, many more partners in this context. And therefore, technology innovation will be a big focus for this particular visit. And the third, which I think is very important as well, is the economic content of our relations. And I think I don't look at it simply in terms of the fact that our trade is about $6 billion, our investments about $3 billion. They have significant investments in India too. But I think what it does is it kind of blends us into what the future of the world is looking like. So on the one hand, you have Europe, which is having certain thoughts about China and how they continue their collaboration, or the reduction of that collaboration, or dehyphenation of that collaboration with China. And where do they then plant their new investments or their alternate investments? Or how do they bring about this new system? What is going to be the new role of the Indo-Pacific? And I think in these areas in which we are directly connected with Europe, and also with the Indo-Pacific and certain concerns that come out of that. And there is, I think, a fourth factor which I would love to emphasize. And I think the Poles have always had a very warm, fuzzy feeling about India, and to not have a prime ministerial visit for a very long time hurts these warm, fuzzy feelings. So I'm really glad that Prime Minister is doing this trip, even if it's after 45 years, and it's to a country that is very, very friendly towards us.
Okay, that's certainly...
Dumpster incident, which the Poles are very, very sentimental about. And I think some of these things will probably be reiterated and reflected upon.
I like what you said there, that Poles have a warm and fuzzy feeling about India. We certainly hope it will reflect in this 2-day visit that the Prime Minister is set to embark on tomorrow. Okay, on that note, I need to take a quick break here on Global Lens. On the other side, we're going to discuss what happened at the Democratic National Convention that's underway in Chicago. Well, it was a teary-eyed Biden that bid farewell to the party. More on that on the other side.
Why is the state not looking at putting an embargo on that?
As a Telangana person, I will not accept.
How do ordinary folks deal with this?
Cooking is an act of law. the first act of love you receive from our mothers and the families.
Modern Indian food is all about contemporary and innovative approach to traditional Indian cooking.
The presentation it's also important, no?
I want to wear this white coat every day and then be a chef.
There are stories. If the name of whiskey is Indri, then there is a whole story behind that.
Cooking food is like a therapy, and eating one is like a pleasure I can give it to myself.
With Lounge Nights, I'm on a journey to celebrate and recognize the best food and nightlife establishments in various cities across India.
Radical presents Lounge Nights every Saturday and Sunday only on News 9 Live.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News 9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Let's now turn our attention to the US elections. It was an emotional farewell for US President Joe Biden on the first day of the Democratic National Convention in Chicago on Monday, as Biden teared up and said he had done his best for America. This as he passed on the torch to Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic presidential nominee. In fact, Harris made a surprise appearance on the first night of the DNC as she paid a rich tribute to her boss. Biden said choosing Harris as his running mate in 2020 was the best decision he made his entire career. He said, and I quote, "She'll be a president our children can look up to. She would be a president respected by world leaders because she already is. She would be a president we can all be proud of, and she would be a historic president who puts her stamp on America's future." His passing of the torch demonstrated a major shift for Democrats. The party, which was deeply fractured just last month as pressure mounted on Biden to exit the presidential race, was united on Monday night behind Kamala Harris and against her Republican opponent, former President Donald Trump. Democrats came together to pay tribute to Biden, who received a 4-minute standing ovation and expressed their gratitude for his decades of public service and personal kindness, as they put it. Biden said, "I love my job, but I love my country more." This is the closest he came to explaining why he chose to give up his own campaign. Meanwhile, Democrats attacked GOP nominee Donald Trump over abortion rights. They highlighted the former president's legal troubles and questioned his morality and argued that his policy beliefs would benefit the wealthy while Harris's would better serve working people. The party also emphasized in personal and historic terms the potential for Harris to become the first woman to win the presidency in the United States. Hillary Clinton said, though she had fallen short 8 years ago, she wanted her grandchildren and their grandchildren to know she had been there for Harris when the glass ceiling finally shatters. "This is where we break through. The future is here," she said. Clinton also connected her own life and her loss and legacy with Harris's hopes this November. She said she'd put many cracks in the highest, hardest glass ceiling, and now Harris is so close to breaking through once and for all. Hillary Clinton didn't miss the opportunity to take potshots at her former opponent in the 2016 presidential contest. Referring to Trump's convictions in New York, Clinton said the former president made his own kind of history, the first person to run for president with 34 felony convictions. The crowd responded with chants of "lock him up." Democrats spin on the "lock her up" chants about Clinton that were omnipresent during Trump's 2016 campaign rallies. Clinton added, "We have him on the run now, so no matter what the polls say, we can't let up. We have to fight for the truth. We have to fight for Kamala, as she will fight for us." While Kamala Harris's candidacy, a strong anti-Trump stance, and abortion are the major unifiers for the party, Israel's ongoing war in Gaza has divided Democrats by age, ideology, sometimes even identity. Meanwhile, Michigan Senator Mallory McMorrow stepped on stage with the large prop, a gigantic book containing the Conservative Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 agenda. The movement reflected how eager Democrats are to tie Trump to the highly controversial Project 2025, which they call a Republican blueprint for a second Trump term. Though the former president has disavowed it, Democrats have framed Project 2025, I beg your pardon, a 900-page playbook for a second Trump term, drafted in part by 6 of his former cabinet secretaries and at least 140 people who worked in his administration as the former president's agenda. Okay, let's go across to our guests. Joining me now is Nalin Ibraham, political analyst who watches events in the US very closely, and Pathikrit Maan, foreign affairs analyst, is also with us. Nalin Ibraham, let me start with you. There is no doubt that the atmosphere at the DNC on the first night was quite electrifying, with Kamala Harris making a surprise appearance and paying a rich tribute to her boss, and Joe Biden understandably getting rather emotional, saying, "I gave you my best, America, but even though I love my job, I love my country more," explaining why he decided to quit the presidential race, and then of course wholeheartedly endorsing Kamala Harris. What did you make of the first night of the Democratic National Convention?
Well, every national convention, whether it's Republican or Democrat, the whole purpose of it is endorsements and making positive comments and praising presidential and vice presidential candidates. So there's nothing special about this convention either. It's the same thing that happens at every national convention for both of the parties. As far as Joe Biden's exit is concerned, I know he's been in politics for 52 years, but has he done enough? I have mixed feelings, because on the social justice front, he may have done well. You know, for instance, he's strengthened the Affordable Care Act. He's also pardoned a lot of federal offenses relating to marijuana, which has helped the youth. He has also, approved the cancellation of student loans. All of these are reasons why the young people as well as women support the Democratic Party, because he's the only one, in the light of the Roe versus Wade declaration, he was the only one. His executive order is what helped women preserve reproductive rights. So there are many things on a social justice front that he has done right. But on the economic front, Biden, to me, has failed as a president, unfortunately. I hate to say it, but that's the case on the economic front, as well as on keeping up a global order. Because if you look at wars during his time, we have had the Ukraine-Russia war, we have had the Palestine-Israel war, we have had the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, the rise of China, the issues in Taiwan and Hong Kong. All of these were never to be seen under Trump's presidency. That's a difference. And the other thing is pure economics. If you look at inflation, it has gone up at least 3 times under Biden's presidency. The national debt has gone up by 12 trillion under his presidency. It used to be 20 trillion in the entire history of the United States. Gas prices have multiplied twice. So all of those, to me, are the negatives. But on a social justice front, he's done a good job. But I think the pace, as far as pace is concerned, if you look at the DNC and if you compare the RNC and the DNC, the more popular names, more popular celebrities, politicians, everybody are in support of Kamala Harris, which would definitely help her cause. As for the RNC, the unfortunate thing is J.D. Vance's unpopular ratings. If you look at J.D. Vance, the vice president of Trump, and compare him to Tim Walz, the vice president of Kamala Harris, J.D. Vance, an ABC poll suggested the other day that he was the least favorable vice presidential candidate of the 21st century, which is bad news for Trump. So overall, I would say the DNC has definitely helped the pace in giving a positive image to the Kamala presidential campaign.
All right. Certainly interesting scenes there. Let me go across to Pathikrit Maan. Pathikrit Maan, Hillary Clinton predictably taking pot shots at Donald Trump there, and then there were these chants of lock him up, a throwback really to the 2016 campaign where Trump had used a similar slogan to target Hillary. And then, of course, the talk about the proverbial glass ceiling. She says she put several cracks in it, but she wants to be able to tell her grandchildren that she was there when Kamala Harris finally smashed that ceiling. Yes, as has been mentioned by Mr. Ibraham, these conventions are essentially meant to pump up the party, the members, the cadres and everyone. But really, what did you make of the speeches that were made from Biden getting all emotional, to Kamala Harris paying him a rich tribute, to Hillary Clinton's strong statements?
Yeah, good evening, Neha. See, I think political speeches like this, whether it is in US or India, are full of rhetoric. So I am not surprised by what has been spoken. And true to their, they would be exhorting their own candidate and asking their voters to vote. That's their choice. But there are two important things that we have to keep in mind. Number one, someone like me, I would not be voting in American elections. So I will speak purely as a outsider looking at it from a third person perspective. Has the world been better in the last 4 years of Biden presidency? And mind you, the legacy of Biden presidency, the responsibility is as much on Kamala Harris as it is on Biden. So it cannot be that Kamala Harris will come and say that I would start a new dawn. Whatever it is, she is equally responsible for that. Being the vice president, she has certainly broken certain glass ceilings. But if you ask me, I am all for gender justice. But just because Kamala Harris is a woman does not excite me that she's a better presidential candidate. That is not the only criteria. If you ask me, as somebody from a developing economy, has it been that the last 4 years Biden and his team has tried to make the world a better place? Certainly not. Whether Trump would make it or not, that's another issue. Right. Number two, when it comes to post the COVID, when the world needed to recover, when the world needed breathing space, did the Americans do enough to prevent conflicts? Whether it is in Ukraine-Russia conflict or the flare-ups in Middle East, well, there are question marks. When it comes to finding out the real perpetrators behind the outbreak of COVID, was enough done to actually, investigate Wuhan? Was enough done to find out the role of University of North Carolina or Anthony Fauci or organization or person like Peter Daszak or the role of WHO? Has enough been done when Biden to reform the multilateral institutions, to make them more inclusive of the aspirations of the developing economies of the global south? Well, absolutely no. If you talk about India, in the last 4 years, US has kept on saying that US is a friend of India, and on the ground they have done things which are exactly the opposite of that. On every issue, you will find the Americans have an interference.
Okay, Mr. Pine, I don't mean to dispute the points that you're making, but we essentially want to keep the focus on domestic American politics and not really look at it through the prism of what it means for India or foreign policy, because this is Trump versus Harris, and I really have very little time. You talked about COVID, let's not forget it was Trump who was accused of badly mishandling the COVID crisis in the US, but I am really out of time. So Nirmal Ibraham, very quickly, I'll give you the last word. A lot of recent polls seem to suggest that Kamala Harris is giving Trump a run for his money, as opposed to what we were witnessing till just a few weeks ago when it was Biden versus Trump, and after that disastrous performance in the debate, it looked like Trump was going to wipe the floor with Biden. But have the tables turned on Trump with Kamala Harris coming into the picture and replacing Biden?
Yeah, I think a couple of factors have played a part. One, as you rightly mentioned at the beginning, there are multiple historic events that will happen if Kamala is selected. She will not only be the first female president, she will be the first half-black president, she will be the half-black female, half-Asian, and she will be the only senator from a Western state in the US. So these are all historic things that will play a part. And the other thing is, as I'm a professor, and sometimes when I correct papers, I'll tell you the logic behind this. When I correct papers, I get 10 or 12 papers on the trot that are really, really bad. And all of a sudden, I get an average paper, which could be the 13th paper, and I really rate it higher compared to the other papers. This is sort of what happened with Kamala and Biden, because Biden's debates, Biden's policies, the economy under Biden, everything unfortunately wasn't doing that great. So all of a sudden, when Kamala came into the picture, it looked like things were changing drastically. And one surprising thing was her among independents, quickly, like 2 weeks right after she was nominated, in 2 weeks her favorability went up from 28% to 44% in 2 weeks among independents. That's a bad sign for Trump. The second thing is among the 6 swing states in the US, although I mentioned the economy, in the swing states, the research shows that they're not concerned about the economy. They are concerned about reproductive rights. They're concerned about Medicare for all of which are also going to support Kamala Harris. But I do think it's going to be a tighter election than last time. Trump definitely will get more votes than last time, but Kamala will give him a run for the money. It'll be a very, very interesting and historic election.
It will be an interesting and historic election, and well, as a woman, I would certainly love to see that glass ceiling smashed, to think it's 2024 and the United States is yet to have a woman president. Quite a story that by itself. I'm completely out of time. So Nalin Ibraham and Patikrit Payan, thank you so much for joining me on Global Lens tonight. All right, and keeping our focus on the US elections, this is an interesting story that has an Iran connect. The US government says it has concluded that the Iranian government is behind the hack and leak operation targeting Donald Trump's presidential campaign and also attempted to target the Biden-Harris campaign. That's what the FBI and other US intelligence agencies have claimed. The FBI in recent days briefed the former president on their preliminary findings after news organizations reported receiving documents believed to have come from an account belonging to a senior Trump campaign official. Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign has said the hackers were unsuccessful in their attempts against the Biden-Harris campaign. The investigation marks the clearest sign of the efforts by Iran and other countries to try and influence the 2024 election, say US officials. In a statement on Monday, the FBI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency said they were confident that the Iranians have, through social engineering and other efforts, sought access to individuals with direct access to the presidential campaigns of both political parties. Such activity, including theft and disclosures, are intended to influence the US election process. It's important to note that this approach is not new. Iran and Russia have employed these tactics not only in the US during this and prior federal election cycles, but also in other countries around the world. Iran's UN mission, meanwhile, has rejected what it called unsubstantiated claims that its government was behind the hack and leak operation.
The FBI said Monday it was investigating claims by Donald Trump's presidential campaign that it was hacked by Iran. The former president said on Saturday that Microsoft had informed his campaign that Iran had hacked one of its websites. Trump said Iran was, quote, only able to get publicly available information. His campaign has pointed to a report on Friday by Microsoft researchers indicating that Iranian government-linked hackers tried breaking into the account of a, quote, high-ranking official on a U.S. presidential campaign in June. The report added that the hackers took over an account belonging to a former political advisor and then used it to target the official. It did not give further details as to the targets' identities. The Washington Post also reported on Monday that the FBI was investigating an alleged attack targeting advisors to the campaign of President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. The newspaper, citing sources, said the FBI began the investigation in June and suspected that Iran was behind the attempts to steal data. The Harris campaign did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Harris became the Democratic presidential nominee after Biden withdrew his bid last month. The Iranian government has denied that it hacked the Trump campaign.
Well, there's never a dull moment in the US presidential elections. Here's a story that has a Taylor Swift aspect. Donald Trump has kicked up yet another storm. This time he has shared doctored images on social media showing pop icon Taylor Swift and her fans supporting his presidential campaign in an apparent effort to tap into the pop singer's mega star power in the US election. Swift has not yet publicly thrown her weight behind any presidential candidate, but she backed President Joe Biden in 2020 and has previously been rather critical of Trump. On Sunday, Trump shared screenshots of posts with manipulated images, including some that experts said appear to be AI generated, suggesting that the pop star and her fans, popularly known as Swifties, support his campaign. In his Truth Social post, which includes a poster of Swift clad in an Uncle Sam outfit and instructing her fans to vote for Trump, the former president wrote, "I accept." That poster is either AI generated or just classically manipulated, say tech experts. The post also includes photos of women wearing shirts with the slogan "Swifties for Trump," some of which experts point out have the telltale signs of being AI generated. Swift's soaring popularity and sway over her fans could make her support valuable in the upcoming presidential election. Both Republicans and Democrats have long wanted to count on her support, but the megastar has been largely reticent about her political leanings. In a demonstration of her star power, when Swift encouraged her fans to register to vote last fall, her plea had an immediate impact. Following her message, there were more than 35,000 new registrations, 23% more than last year and the most since 2020. In 2018, Swift broke her silence and the internet by endorsing the Democratic opponent of far-right U.S. Senator Marsha Blackburn in Tennessee. She has since spoken out, in particular, for the legal right on abortion and LGBTQ rights. In recent weeks, intense speculation has swirled on social media that Swift will endorse Democratic nominee Kamala Harris in the November election. The megastar has not commented publicly, but that has not stopped legions of fans from forming a group called Swifties for Kamala, attracting tens of thousands of followers on social media platforms. All right, that's all the time we have on this edition of Global Lens. Thanks so much for watching. Do join us again at the same time tomorrow.
One of my friends was residing here. Every rainy season, he will take his mom or otherwise even the dog also, pet dog also, he will take the pet dog and go to the resort, which is at Banasura.